Hello, I'm Super Frank Kupsidis, founder and president, LPTV Broadcasters Association. And today we are honored, privileged to have the one and only amazing Davina Sashkin with us. Davina, tell us about yourself. Tell us what makes you so amazing.
Thank you, Frank. It's so good to be with you. I appreciate this opportunity. What makes me so amazing is, oh, well, how much time do you have?
Let's start off with you're an attorney. So that kind of makes you not amazing, but
Right.
how you got over that hump. What makes you amazing?
I like to think that I'm a little bit different from other FCC lawyers because I didn't start out trying to be a lawyer. I had a little bit of a career before going to law school. I was in corporate communications, and I have a master's degree in communications policy. And then I went to law school. And I specifically wanted to study communications law and regulation. So I have been practicing that sort of law ever since 2007. I'm now a partner with the law firm Baker Hostetler out of Washington, D.C., but I live in beautiful Austin, Texas. So I've had a lot of that inside the Beltway experience, but I also now get to see it from the outside.
So what's it like living in Austin, but having to deal with the FCC?
Honestly, it's not much different. I mean, when I was based in the DC area for nearly 20 years, most of our communications was by email or phone anyway. There were occasions where we would have meetings in person, but, of course, the pandemic got rid of all of that for everybody anyway. So
Sure.
I haven't had occasion to need to be at the FCC. And of course, there's direct flights if I ever do need to be there. So.
Awesome. So why does somebody need an FCC attorney? Why does an LPTV station, why can't they just use their wife, who's an attorney?
Well, just like when someone comes to me and says, I have a friend who was arrested for a DUI, can you help them? I do not have the requisite expertise for that. Every attorney, no matter how much of a generalist they are, we do actually have sort of niche areas of expertise. And so I would never take on that kind of case because I would be doing that person a disservice because I don't know what I'm doing. And just like, in the
I find
case
that
of,
hard to believe.
I'm sorry.
I said I find that hard to believe, but go ahead.
But you want the best person for the particular job, right? And so an FCC attorney brings to the table a deep level of expertise and knowledge and familiarity with the really arcane rules of the FCC, the policies. There's rules, and then there's how the staff acts and does things and their actual procedural activities that are not necessarily written down. Another thing is, there's constant changes in what happens in the FCC regulatory space. There are releases every single day and decisions every single day that we FCC attorneys read. Like, this is our job to read these and incorporate them into our base of knowledge so that we can then advise clients, okay, this has happened and this means X, Y, and Z for you, or heads up, it looks like the FCC is cracking down on this particular area, and so you should be more cognizant of what you're doing. Those things, that level of niche expertise is why you need an FCC attorney.
Okay. So what are some of the most recent um, regulations or rulings that you've seen that most people don't know about or
Most
need to be clarified, needs clarification?
Well, of course, the biggest one, my client was just involved in a very large consent decree, which I helped negotiate for many months.
Decree.
I'm sorry.
What is a dissent decree?
Consent decree is essentially a settlement with the FCC. It's where, there's been a determination that there's some sort of violation of the rules, and the broadcaster has either accepted that they have done wrongdoing, or they're just agreeing to settle because it may just be the easiest way to get past it and move on. So in this case, there was a rather large fine associated, but the entity was allowed to keep the vast majority of the stations and continue operating or sell. And what that was about the what they call hopping, which is to move your station from point A to point B and try to do so in a manner that complies with the FCC rules, which allow moving for 30 miles between transmitter points. But a lot of LPTV stations have over the years moved multiple times for many more hops than that. And the FCC has decided that this is not what they want to be seen in the LPTV world. So they decided to put a stop to that.
Got it. And also, for example, foreign content, right? Disclosure rules, which also goes into your contracts or agreements for a sub-channel, if you have one. Do you want to talk about that
the FCC recently, well, actually last year, adopted this rule in which they, it's prompted by the interest in recent years from the Hill, honestly. There are a few radio stations in the United States that broadcast Russian programming and Chinese programming, not to mention all of the usual things we don't normally think about as foreign programming, but things like BBC or France 24, Al Jazeera, all very reputable, informational, and wonderful programming, frankly. But the FCC adopted rules that now require stations to take a much more hands-on and approach to determining whether any of their programmers, whether it's under a TBA or an LMA, which is essentially where someone leases the time on your station, or if it's a sub-channel programmer, you have to now do diligence and ask questions as to whether there's a foreign government behind that programming. And if there is, there's now a sponsorship ID requirement for all such programming, in addition to online or to some public file requirements if you're a Class A station. What's interesting about this is NAB, along with some others, have challenged these new rules, and they're actually in the DC circuit arguing in like 2 weeks, I believe, right before NAB. So we shall see. In the meantime, that rule is still applicable, and stations need to take it very seriously.
So if you're showing BBC News for a half hour in the evening on your station, do you have to do that disclosure?
Yes.
Yes. So
Yes,
it doesn't matter if it's 24/7 or a half hour, you need that disclosure.
That is correct.
However, if you started broadcasting that before the decree went into effect, you're not required to adhere to it for 6 months. Is that correct?
Not yet. Yes, they gave some leeway for stations to, if you were to start a programming agreement today, for example, you would have the obligation, because you're starting it afresh, that you would have to do this diligence and then start those disclaimers. But if you already have programming in effect and it's a longer term contract, you have until September to become compliant. I honestly don't really understand the logic of that, but I didn't make that rule. So I'd say just start being compliant sooner rather than later. You know that it's your obligation. It's not really that difficult. You can just start it at any time.
Right. So start it now so you're not up against the deadline
Right.
and pass the deadline and all of a sudden you get a fine.
Exactly. It's better to just get it underway now, become compliant as soon as you know of a rule, even if you don't technically have to until September, because things get busy. People go away for, a vacation and and you just forget. It's better to take care of it while it's fresh.
Sure. So, what are the major errors you see LPTV station owners making?
Honestly, it's some pretty basic regulatory compliance things because a lot of LPTV owners are under the impression that a lot of the regulatory compliance rules don't apply to LPTV. Now, while it is true that there are quite a few of the bigger requirements that don't apply to LPTV, like online public file requirements, for example, or children's programming requirements. Again, this is excluding Class A stations. Um, but there are quite a few just your everyday compliance requirements, like ownership reports. Every 2 years, biennial ownership reports are due for all stations, LPTV or full power. LPTV stations often just fail to file, and the FCC has now been coming around, and they didn't always in the past seem to care very much, frankly, but now they do, and they're giving folks an opportunity to correct that mistake. But things like that, ownership reports, EAS issues that a lot of LPTV stations don't realize they have emergency alert obligations. And that has come up in the context of the nationwide test, in which all stations, unless you're a translator, were required to participate in last summer. And there were reports that were required to be filed. Ownership is always an issue. Again, it's one of these things where, you're a small mom and pop owner and you don't realize that any majority stake change actually requires prior consent of the FCC. So then you find out, a year later, 2 years later, 5 years later, that you had an unauthorized transfer of control. And the FCC doesn't just fine you for the fact of that having happened. Then you have to go back and, do multiple, changes in ownership. It costs money to do that because you have to pay someone like me to do more than would have been necessary at the time. Plus, they can fine you for all the years in which you were operating without appropriate consent. I've also seen this. What's interesting is a lot of, again, because a lot of LPTV owners are maybe solos or families, and as the patriarch often gets older, consults their local lawyer about estate planning. They'll want to put the station and the license into a trust, which makes complete sense from a estate planning point of view. However, that actually has to get approved by the FCC because the FCC treats that estate, that trust, as a wholly different owner. So those are things that get folks tripped up a lot, and could easily be avoided if you just, pick up the phone.
So, what parting words do you have for everybody? What parting advice, words of wisdom, your Delphi?
I would say do not hesitate. Yes, calling an FCC attorney costs money, but we hope to give you a lot of value for that money. I'm not interested in, running up a bill for you. I want you to come to me for something that is going to be valuable for your business. I want to keep you on the straight and narrow. I want to be able to offer you advice based on my relationships with the FCC staff, and I want you to pick up the phone, and I don't want to have to tell you later on, okay, this is going to cost you double now because we didn't deal with it at the first instance.
What is your email address that people can contact you on?
My email address is dsashkin, says DSASHKIN @bakerlaw.com.
Thank you. One final question, like I always ask. Can you sing us a couple bars of your favorite rock song?
Are you kidding me?
No. Would I kid you?
Come on, you asked Dan what his favorite food was. That's so
I
much
know,
easier.
but I'm asking you to sing
Oh, good grief. Now I can't even give me a song. My favorite rock song.
any song. Let's open it up. Any song. American Songbook, classic, whatever. If
Oh my gosh.
what in the shower this morning?
I, you know what I have in my head right now? I have uh I want to rock and roll all night. And I don't even like that song.
Excellent. I think that's perfect for Austin. And we'll end right there. Davina, thanks so much for your time. And thank you.
Thank you.